Ottawa has hit back with a bold 50% tariff. In response to U.S. President Donald Trump's steel and aluminum duties, Canada is targeting the very core of North America's integrated supply chains. This retaliatory measure could instantly raise costs across the automotive and beverage container industries, from Detroit to Vancouver. If the U.S. doesn't reverse course, both countries' industrial centers may fall into a synchronized recession. At the end of June, a high-security cabinet session was held in the Rio wing of Canada's Prime Minister's office. It seemed like a routine Friday. Reporters expected a standard release titled Energy Transition Plan. But the moment the meeting concluded, one leaked sentence sent shockwaves through Bay Street and K Street alike. Carney had authorized the Treasury and Trade Departments to retaliate against the Trump administration's steel and aluminum tariffs. Just hours later, major outlets, Reuters, Bloomberg, Yahoo Finance, confirmed the plan. Canada would impose heavy duties on roughly $22 billion worth of U.S. metal imports annually, with a 50% cap under a provisional rule set to be revealed mid-July. Trump's March decision marked the harshest trade move since NAFTA's founding. The U.S. slapped 50% tariffs on Canadian hot-rolled steel, aluminum extrusions, and raw materials for pressurized cans, invoking national security via Section 232. Leaked memos from inside the White House suggested the true goal was to stop Chinese steel from slipping into the U.S. via Canada by mislabeling its origin. But the Carney government rejected that as faulty protectionism, arguing the real data and environmental impact was being ignored. In the process, it penalized a critical supply chain within an allied bloc. Canada initially responded with caution. In April, Ottawa set up a $3.5 billion Canadian dollar transition fund, offering interest-free loans to key manufacturers like Stelco, Rio Tinto, Alcan, and ArcelorMittal Dofasco. But by late June, it was clear the buffer wasn't enough. The 50% tariff had made Canadian steel $38 per ton costlier than Chicago's spot market rate. Oil pipeline projects in Alberta, chassis suppliers in Ontario, and aluminum bottlers in British Columbia began borrowing from the Bank of Montreal to handle rising inventory expenses. Carney wasn't just aiming to hit back. He was ready to challenge the U.S. security justification head-on. Sources said he gave his staff 48 hours to compile casting certificates, furnace chemistry logs, and carbon isotope data, effectively to prove that Canadian steel was not just local, but cleaner and traceable. He went further, stating, "American steel has a higher carbon footprint. Ours is cleaner. If they pass cost to consumers, that's their problem." So why 50%? Well, internal reports say Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland ordered an economic stress test back in April. If Canada raised duties to 50%, U.S. steel coils would rise over 420 Canadian dollars per ton, adding about 850 Canadian dollars to the price of each pickup and SUV made in the Detroit-Toronto corridor. Crucially, automakers, not Canadian buyers, would likely bear most of that cost. The ripple effect reached global markets. On the London Metal Exchange, cold-rolled steel futures jumped 60 Canadian dollars per ton in a single week. Aluminum 3-month futures hit an 8-month high, crossing 2,540 Canadian dollars. Morgan Stanley flagged the surge as a sign that supply security fears were back. Canada, despite its size, is a vital supplier of low-carbon aluminum to North America. Its metal, produced with clean power, is used in U.S. beer cans and Tesla vehicles. A disruption would raise carbon compliance costs and distort clean energy tax credits under the Inflation Reduction Act. The Canada Border Services Agency's impact study showed that if the U.S. pivots away from Canadian aluminum, it would likely rely on suppliers in Australia or the Gulf. This would not only inflate transport emissions, but also increase delivery times, worsening the U.S. carbon scorecard. So Carney's retaliation isn't just financial, it's strategic, combining environmental superiority, domestic industry protection, and legal challenge. Alongside the tariff, Ottawa is launching a resource development plan. A leaked draft outlines a $4.8 billion Canadian dollar Green Steel Accord fund, backed by the Royal Bank of Canada. It will support projects like ArcelorMittal Dofasco's electric arc furnace conversion in Hamilton, hydrogen-based iron processing in Sault Ste. Marie, and an inert anode initiative at Rio Tinto's Quebec plant. Carney's logic: if tariffs hit now, use the window to upgrade Canada's low-carbon capacity. While Trump's team brushed this off as technocratic overreach, Republican voices in Congress started raising concerns. Senator Bill Hagerty of Wisconsin warned that Canada is a top partner in agriculture, energy, and metals. If retaliation escalates, political wins for Trump could trigger backlash from CEOs, not just unions. Ford and GM internal documents back that up. A 50% tariff on Canadian thick steel plate could slash profit margins by $320 per vehicle, amounting to $45 million in losses over a model's life cycle. An International Institute of Finance report projected that prolonged tariff wars could cut 0.3 percentage points off U.S. and Canadian GDP by 2026. While modest for the U.S., it's significant given ongoing inflation and rate hikes. Canada may fare slightly better due to energy exports and a weaker dollar, but the IIF still warned of a 0.4% growth hit via reduced net exports. Politically, Carney is stitching together a coalition. With NDP and Bloc Québécois support, he's countering opposition leader Pierre Poilievre's claim that Canada is fighting protectionism with protectionism. But polls tell a different story. 61% of Canadians back equal retaliation, and in Ontario's industrial regions, it climbs to 68%. Carney's office has a dual mission: resist U.S. pressure while proving Canada is still a reliable global trade hub. At the G7 Finance Summit in London, Canada floated a tariff ladder, a 50% ceiling that would fall every 3 months, contingent on U.S. rollbacks. This would apply pressure while leaving room to de-escalate. Legal backing matters too. Canada's last retaliation in 2018, a 25% tariff, was lifted once the USMCA deal wrapped. This time, Carney insists on a defensible case that can go before the World Trade Organization. CBSA lawyers confirmed a complaint has been drafted, arguing the U.S. is abusing Section 232. Filing in Geneva will proceed once the tariffs are formally enacted. Japan, South Korea, and Australia are watching closely. If Ottawa's strategy works, these nations may pursue mirrored responses, especially in Japan, where the stakes in raw material imports and car exports are high. For now, Ottawa is focusing on metals, not food, tech, or energy. Carney is being careful with energy since 69% of Western Canadian oil still flows to U.S. refineries, and much of Canada's public revenue depends on that link. Support among Canadian industry is wide. United Steelworkers Canada's president called Trump's tariffs a betrayal and welcomed Carney's move. The Quebec Aluminum Association praised the aluminum defense, citing $280 million in lost revenue over the past year, but not everyone's thrilled. The Brewers Association warns that even a 5-cent increase in can prices could break small craft beer operations. In response, Carney is negotiating selective tax exemptions with major beverage firms like Coca-Cola, Molson, and Danone. Foreign outlets are calling this Carney's coalition diplomacy. Will the U.S. back down? It's unclear. Trump, facing an election, is doubling down on his America First message, especially in steel states like Ohio and Pennsylvania. But those very plants rely on Canadian imports. A prolonged clash could spark job losses. The American Iron and Steel Institute predicts that cutting off Canadian raw steel would reduce U.S. furnace utilization by 4 percentage points, leading to over 7,000 job losses in key swing states. Trump faces a tough call play to the base with protectionist rhetoric, or risk economic blowback before the vote. The consequences go beyond autos and cans. Tesla plans to source Canadian aluminum for its Berlin factory. If costs rise, they may shift to lower-grade suppliers like Indonesia, raising carbon emissions and compromising clean energy financing. SpaceX's Starship also relies on Canadian-made alloys. Tariffs could distort aerospace budgets and timelines. And while the WTO should serve as arbiter, its appeals body is in limbo, paralyzed by U.S. blockages. Carney's WTO complaint may sit unresolved for years, making his pressure triangle, tariff, investment, diplomacy, the only active strategy. Meanwhile, China is watching closely. Beijing believes Western divisions will only boost its global market share. China's Ministry of Commerce is quietly rerouting steel exports to Europe via Central Asia, seeing opportunity in North America's discord. Ultimately, Carney's 50% tariff is more than just a tax. It's a sweeping plan that touches climate, industry, politics, and trade. Its outcome could redefine North American economics for the next decade. Steel and aluminum are the backbone of $836 billion in trade between the U.S. and Canada. Carney's message is clear. Only a firm, data-driven response will make Washington reconsider. Trump is hoping his nationalist slogan still sells. Carney is betting on facts, allies, and strategy. What's your take on this showdown? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next breakdown.